had a very successful gala. My goal is to raise about $15,000. Each one of these dollars would go to paying our rent for our space, serving a hot meal, particularly in the wintertime, having a warm and welcoming place for anybody that comes that needs us. We also have services in which we provide computer services, our phone system, so that people can do job searches and housing searches. So we have a whole comprehensive services. This year we need about $103,000 to run our organization. It's not a lot of money for the amount of people that we serve. We serve over 625 different people per year. We want to be able to open our doors every day. You know, when it's a holiday, it's not a holiday for somebody who is homeless. So we try to open every day. We had two really amazing people speak at our fall gala. The first one is a very special, amazing woman. I met her about a year ago when I first started at the day center. She was very articulate. She was a nurse, but was in a domestic violence situation. We wanted her to talk about not only that original experience when I met her about a year ago, but also her journey now towards rebuilding her life. And so Jeannie was saying that she left for Florida, and we helped her with the ticket because her mother was very ill, and Jeannie was a nurse, so she wanted to be with her mother. While she was there, she ended up going back to nursing and getting her own apartment. And so we flew her back so that she could inspire other people who are in that situation.
Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate you being here. I know I personally do, and I'm sure Marilyn and all of the guests at the Day Center also do, because without you, without the Day Center, I wouldn't be standing in front of you. I'm absolutely certain of that. As Marilyn said, I was involved in a domestic violence relationship, and because of my stubborn Irish pride, there was no way I was going to tell my family or anyone I knew that I was in trouble, that I needed help, that I was a prisoner, that I was stuck somehow. I did finally reach out to my sister, who actually brought me to Massachusetts, but because of her situation, I couldn't stay with her for more than a few days. So I found myself on the streets of Waltham. I'd spent some time in the women's shelter here, and one of the most amazing things, I ate once a day at the soup kitchen. That was it. And that was all right, because at least I knew it was a safe place to go. I played cards with two elderly women, and that was just my spot. It was a little bit of normalcy to me. When I first came here, if you've seen the photo exhibit, you'll see that there's one that's entitled Feet, and it is my feet at hitting the bricks all the time. I couldn't look up. I could only stare at my feet. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. So when Marilyn when I first met her, the first thing she said to me was, "Welcome. You are one of our guests." And she meant it. And I was just so moved to her and Karen and all of the other people who supported the Day Center. We were truly guests, human beings that were worth something for no other reason than except that we existed, you know? And she made it so easy. It was as if I was in her home. She made it so easy to talk to. There was no judgment in her eyes. There was no anything. There was no pity. There was just, I want to get to know you as a guest in my home. And I noticed that she treated everyone that way. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know I was once somebody. She didn't know that I had been through one of the most difficult times of my life. She cared about me just because, just for no reason. So as we began to speak with each other, she asked me one day, would I be interested in participating in this really neat project? And if you know Marilyn, and I'm sure most of you do, she gets so excited about all these things she thinks of, and it's almost impossible to say no to her because she's infectious in her enthusiasm for what she's doing. So when she first said to me, I have this perfect thing and I really want you to do this, would you be interested in taking a camera and documenting through your own eyes what it means to be homeless, the experience of being homeless? And I thought, why not? She thought I was worth asking, so I'll go for it. And as I participated in the project, I found that over a very short period of time, I wasn't staring at my feet anymore. I actually felt like I was worth enough to look up and move on, whatever that was going to mean. So I can't tell you how much that expanded my perspective and brought my world back into something that I could live in and thrive in all of a sudden. So, and I've told Marilyn this a million times. I mean, I was sleeping in the cemetery, I was on the streets, and it wasn't the easiest time in my life. Pride was going to kill me. And one of the things Marilyn taught me was there's no shame in being where we're at. We're all special, we're all worthwhile. Somebody I had met, Ron, one of the other photographers would always say to me, being homeless does not define who you are. It's what you do with the situation that shows your true character. And he would tell me that all the time. He said, this is just a temporary hiccup. It's just a temporary hiccup. And for many of the people, the guests at the shelters, the guests at the day center, some of the people that you probably see all the time, this is simply a hiccup. And it could happen to anyone. Because I tell you, before I was homeless, I raised 4 children. I'm a registered nurse. I climbed the corporate ladder. I took care of everyone and everything all the time. So for me to be homeless, that was never going to happen. I never saw that coming. And then once I found myself there, there was no way I was going to be able to get out of it. Not without some support, not without some assistance, and not without people who cared about me just because I was here. So I really, really appreciate all of you being here and all of your support. Now living in Florida, my mom became sick. Actually, I got the news right after we started this project. And so I'm taking care of her, living in Florida. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm back doing hospice home care, which is something I absolutely love. And it feels so good to be alive again. Thank you.
The second amazing person that we had, his name is Joe Finn, and he's the executive director of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. And he talked about the importance of having a day center that we have, how it's open to anybody that comes in through the door, and how we accept people wherever they are, and we help them to access whatever services that they need so that they can rebuild their lives. But Joe was saying something like, wouldn't it be fantastic if my organization was able to also hand out housing? Because when someone is homeless, housing is really the thing that they need, the service that they need. You don't have to do anything to get the housing. Is the way to go. And he gave us examples about how people really turned their lives around and lived a more decent and humane life because they had a home.
So I want you to imagine a very different approach to homelessness for a moment. So many of you who know Marilyn, and you know the context that she works in within the community day center. Now imagine for one moment that welcoming, that gift of hospitality, that creating of a safe haven feeling for all those people who enter into that center. Imagine on top of it now, Marilyn would also be able to say to that homeless person, by the way, I have a home for you. What most homeless persons would say right away, and it points to what the failure in our system has been for the last 35 years, the first thing that homeless person is going to say is, what's the catch? Because we built a culture around homelessness over the last 35 years or so that suggests that we, the human service provider, are going to somehow fix you And your part of the deal is that you need to conform to everything that what we're telling you to do, and that somehow that's going to move you forward. Our response in Massachusetts for the last 35 years to homelessness has been emergency shelter. And what do we have to show for it? More homelessness. The state spends just on shelter here in Massachusetts, and I go to other states and I tell them this, and it blows their minds, over $250 million annually just on emergency shelter. Illness or substance abuse. There are long histories of trauma and abuse that may be involved in those situations. And the dirty secret out there is that in many cases, the shelter has become the acceptable housing niche for some of the poorest and most disabled people in the Commonwealth. And the other thing is, unfortunately, that many of the people that you see on the streets here and in other places, they can't even access much of the shelter that exists oftentimes. And that's the difference that folks are bringing here to you today. The Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance is an advocacy, policy, but it's also a service innovation group. We're kind of in a private sector. The best way you could describe it is we're an incubator of new technologies. We're an incubator of new programs that are outcome-based and, again, demonstrate that they actually work. And we've been forwarding a model that we refer to as the Housing First model. And this is a movement that's happening nationally. The one common denominator for everybody who's homeless, they don't have housing. That's it. And so the goal should be, and the objective, and the only acceptable outcome for homelessness is being able to have people housed. Now let me give you a little sense of the difference in how I came to this. You know, it came out of a lot of failure, quite honestly, in dealing with this. But I used to run a little shelter in Quincy, Massachusetts, called Father Bill's Place. And at that shelter, I wrote one of the first federal Shelter Plus Care grants. It's actually, Shelter Plus Care is under Hart now, is supposedly going into Section 8, but we're worried because we may be losing some housing. But I wrote one of the very first grants. And the person I had in mind was a paranoid schizophrenic woman who was living in what we call the weeds in Quincy. She was living outside. And whenever she would come into the shelter, she rarely would come into the shelter because she didn't trust any of us there. But she would come in occasionally to shower and to get a meal. She was always courteous and polite. But I assure you, she was one of the most seriously mentally ill persons I had ever encountered to that point in my life. And when I got this grant, I went to her first and I said, Teresa, I got great news. I have housing for you, a place for you to stay. And she goes, oh, Joe, that's fantastic. That's all I need. All I need is a place to stay, and I'll be able to get out of this situation. Thank you so much. And then I said, and I'll never forget this part of my education, I said, Teresa, there's only one catch. She said, what's that? And I said, in order to get into that housing, you're going to have to acknowledge that you're mentally ill. Well, Teresa immediately put her head down, was sad, shook her head, looks back up with me, looks me straight in the eye and says, Joe, she said, that's not right. I can't lie just to get housing. Very quickly it dawned on me, the problem wasn't Teresa, the problem was me. And the problem was the system that we created. And so what we did at that point in time, I went to the DMH, and I went to the South Shore Mental Health, and I went to everybody who was involved, and our caseworkers did and said, why does she have to acknowledge that? Why can't we just put her into that housing and see what happens? And that was our early approach on low-threshold housing. And the great news for her was within 2 weeks she was linked up with DMH case management. Within a few weeks she was back on a regime in terms of medication. And she's still housed outside that program successfully today.
We had over 110 people come to support the day center. More importantly about raising money for the day center was the fact of raising the whole issue of homelessness. And I think we really broadened our group of support tonight. We had people from the faith community, from the business community, from the residents, as well as our donors and our guests were here today. How many of us, if we're out on the street, when it's raining or snowing, saying, thank God I'm going to be going home. And just imagine how these people are, that they can't say, thank God I'm going home, because they're going to be in a box, a cardboard box, or under the bridge, or sleeping from, couch to couch. Some things that we are very familiar with are the visible homeless, those that might be chronically homeless. But there's another kind of homelessness that is invisible to many people, the ones that do couch surfing, that go to friend, to family, and yet not being able to afford to have their own apartment. So I found these two speakers to be very exciting. What they had to say was very touching, and for me to be re-energized to see what is the next phase, what is the next service I'm going to provide for our guests.